My name is Emily Carter. I am 34 years old. I was standing in my own home, but it felt like I didn't belong there. My chest hurt, my hands were shaking, and there was this ringing in my ears. Someone I trusted more than anyone had just cut me open with a few simple words. I had already lost so much. A life I built. A future I thought was safe. The kind of loss that makes you forget who you are for a second. And then came the line about the better woman. Like I was a mistake. Like my whole life was some cheap trade. I wanted to scream. Break something. Beg for an answer that would only hurt more. But I didn't. I swallowed every word, every tear, every sound. I went quiet. And that silence became the one thing they never saw coming. That silence wasn't who I used to be. Before all of this, I was the kind of woman who talked things through, who made lists, who believed you could fix almost anything if you were honest enough and tried hard enough. My life wasn't exciting, but it was mine. Work during the week, food shopping on Saturdays, a glass of wine and a film on Fridays. I liked knowing what tomorrow looked like. I liked feeling needed. I thought being steady, being kind, being loyal would be enough to keep my world safe. Trust for me was slow but total. I didn't give it easily, but once I did, I handed over the whole thing. I was the friend people called at midnight when they were crying in their car. I was the one who listened, who said, "You're not crazy, you're just hurt." I grew up watching adults promise one thing and do another, so I swore I wouldn't live like that. If I said I loved you, I meant it. If I said I was staying, I stayed. I honestly thought that if I chose carefully and worked hard, I could build something no one would walk away from. When we first got together, I thought I'd finally found someone who wanted the same thing. He was funny in that effortless way that makes everyone in a room lean in a little closer. He wasn't perfect, not by a long shot, but he felt solid. He said things like, "You and me against the world," and for a long time, I believed him. We did all the ordinary things, shared a tiny flat that was always a bit too cold, argued about the right way to stack the dishwasher, fell asleep on the sofa halfway through Sunday films. It wasn't some epic love story. It was two people building a quiet, small life together, and I loved that. I trusted him with the boring, important parts of me. The parts no one puts on social media, the nights I came home exhausted and snappy, the mornings I woke up worrying about money, about work, about my body changing. He saw all of that and stayed, and that to me meant everything. I didn't check his phone. I didn't track where he was. If he said he was at work, I believed him. If he said, "She's just a friend," I took it at face value. That was my rule. If I demanded honesty, I had to offer trust. When we decided to try for a baby, it felt like the next natural step. We were settled, we had a small place of our own, we were doing grown-up things like talking about pensions and home repairs. I remember holding the positive test in my hand and shaking, laughing and crying at the same time. He hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. For a few weeks, everything looked like the life I'd always pictured. We talked about names. He started putting his hand on my stomach at night, like he was already protecting someone. And then, just like that, it was gone. One doctor's appointment turned into a quiet room, a screen, and words I couldn't fully process. I remember staring at a ceiling tile, hearing phrases like, "These things happen," and "try again later," and feeling like someone had pulled the floor out from under me. The future I'd been holding in my head, all those tiny imagined moments, just vanished. I went home with empty hands and a body that suddenly felt like a stranger. It changed something deep inside me, not just grief, shame. Like my body had failed at the one thing it was supposed to do. He said all the right things at first. "It's not your fault. We'll be okay. We'll try again when you're ready." But I could see something closing in his eyes. He went back to work quickly. I stayed home a bit longer, moving through the house like I was walking through water. People sent messages, flowers, then life went on for them. For me, time stopped. For him, I don't know. He started staying later and later at the office. At least, that's what he said. The first warning signs were so small I almost feel silly now for not seeing them. His phone was suddenly always on silent, always face down. He took it into the bathroom with him. Before, he'd left it lying around, open, forgotten on the arm of the sofa. When I asked why he'd put a new passcode on it, he laughed and said there'd been some security thing at work. It sounded thin, but I was tired. I didn't want another thing to worry about. I told myself grief makes people weird, that we were both just coping in different ways. He started snapping at me over nothing. A misplaced mug, a forgotten errand. "You're always in your head," he'd say. "You never want to do anything anymore." And I'd swallow the urge to say, "I lost our baby. Of course I'm not myself." Instead, I'd nod, apologize, promise to try harder. That became a pattern. Me trying harder, him becoming more distant. It was like there was a glass wall between us, and I was the only one pressing my hands against it, trying to find the door. Little comments began to slip into conversation, offhand comparisons that stung more than he probably meant them to. My ex would have loved this band. She was always up for a night out, no matter how tired she was. At first I rolled my eyes and said, "Then you should have stayed with her." Half joking, half not. He'd grin, pull me in for a hug and say, "Don't be silly, I chose you." I tried to let it go. Everyone has a past. Everyone has old stories. But her name started to come up more. She'd liked one of his posts. She'd messaged to say she was sorry about what we'd gone through. She was just being kind. I told myself not to be petty. I was 34, not a teenager jealous over social media likes. I kept reminding myself of who I thought he was, of all the nights we'd lain awake talking about honesty, loyalty, how we'd never do to each other what other people had done to us. I leaned on those memories like they were proof. But my gut felt different. There is a special kind of silence that falls in a house when something is wrong. It's in the way they move, the way conversations skim over the surface of things and never go deep. He was there, physically, but not really there. Always half turned away, mind somewhere else. I'd catch him smiling at his phone, that soft, fond smile I used to think was only for me. When I asked what was funny, he'd say, "Oh, just a meme," and lock the screen. The night I found it, nothing dramatic was happening. There were no slammed doors, no big fight. He'd fallen asleep on the sofa after dinner, TV still on, phone slipping out of his hand. I was tidying up, stacking plates, wiping surfaces, doing all the small things that keep a life running. When I came back into the living room, his phone lit up on the cushion, buzzing with a new message. I told myself to look away. It's his phone. You trust him. You don't need to see. My heart was already beating too fast, though, like my body knew something my head refused to admit. The screen lit up again, and this time I glanced. Her name. The preview showed only a few words, but it was enough to turn my stomach. "I miss you too." My hands moved before my brain caught up. I picked up the phone. My fingers hesitated over the passcode, the one he'd said was for work security. I tried his usual numbers. It opened. That tiny click of acceptance made my knees go weak. I shouldn't look. I knew that. Once I saw, I could never unsee. But the thought of putting it back down and pretending I hadn't, that felt worse. The chat was right there at the top. Her picture, their thread. I tapped it. Messages filled the screen. Long ones, not just jokes or casual check-ins. Confessions, late-night thoughts, her asking how he was. Him saying he felt trapped. Her saying she still thought about what they could have been. My eyes raced past whole paragraphs, catching on certain phrases that burned. "I don't think she understands me anymore. You were always the exciting one. I left a better woman for a safe life. Maybe that was my biggest mistake." The room went quiet. The TV was still on, the lights still bright, but everything inside me stopped. I stared at that sentence, at the words, "better woman," and for a second I couldn't feel my hands. It was like my body had dropped out from under me, and all that was left was that line, glowing on the screen in my living room. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that one sentence. My thumb kept the screen awake, like I was afraid if it went dark I'd wake up and realize I'd imagined it. I left a better woman for a safe life. Maybe that was my biggest mistake. I read it over and over until the words stopped sounding like English and just felt like a weight on my chest. Then I did the thing I always said I'd never do. I scrolled. The dates hit me first. Messages from the week of the hospital appointment. The same day I'd sat in a paper gown, crying in a toilet cubicle, he'd written, "I can't talk to her. She's a ghost. I wish I was with you instead." My fingers went cold. While I was losing our baby, he was leaning on her, telling her he felt more alive when he saw her name pop up. More alive. I kept going, eyes blurring, catching fragments. I shouldn't have left you. You were always the one. If I didn't feel so guilty, I'd leave tonight. I saw references to nights out I remembered. The work drinks he'd had to go to. The team-building weekend when he'd come back with that new aftershave and a distant look. In his words to her, those nights weren't just drinks. They were hotel rooms, shared taxis, hands on skin I thought only I had the right to. He hadn't just drifted. He had chosen. My stomach twisted. Some part of me still tried to defend him even then. Maybe it was just messages. Maybe he was exaggerating. People say things they don't mean. I clung to that thought like a person clinging to a burning rope. And then I saw my name. She cries all the time. I can't breathe in that house. She won't let it go. The baby, the loss, all of it. It's like living in a graveyard. She's comfortable, not passionate. Your passion. Comfortable. Graveyard. I read his descriptions of our home, our life, my grief, like they belonged to a stranger. The words were efficient, neat. He'd summed up my entire existence in a handful of complaints and handed them to her like excuses. A sentence further down made my scalp prickle. I'm trying to sort the money first. She can't afford the mortgage alone. Once that's sorted, I'm gone. Sort the money. I put his phone down like it had burned me, walked to the kitchen, and opened the drawer with the paperwork. Our joint statements were in a folder, filed the way I always did everything. Tidy, labeled, hoping order could protect me. I pulled up the banking app on my own phone. I'd never looked too closely before. He handled the transfers, the savings. I trusted him. The savings account was lower than it should have been. Much lower. There were transfers I didn't recognize. Regular ones, small enough to slip under the radar month by month, always labeled something vague like loan or help. A bigger one, a few weeks ago, matching the amount we'd talked about putting aside for when we try again. I scrolled through the statements, heart racing as I matched dates. One transfer lined up exactly with a weekend he'd gone to visit an old mate who was going through a divorce. Another with a sudden last-minute conference he'd traveled to alone. It wasn't just my heart he'd spent. It was our future, our safety net, our plan B. A dull roar started in my ears. Somehow, even knowing what I knew, my first instinct was to blame myself. I should have checked. I should have stayed closer. I should have been more fun, less tired, more forgiving. Maybe if I hadn't withdrawn after the loss, he wouldn't have looked elsewhere for whatever this was. I knew, logically, that wasn't fair, but logic was nowhere in that kitchen with me at midnight, staring at numbers that used to mean security and now meant betrayal. I went back to his phone because I couldn't not. My hand was steadier this time, which scared me. Numbness is its own kind of danger. Further down the thread, the tone changed. Less flirting, more planning. We could get a place together near your work. She'll cope. Everyone will say she's strong. My sister already thinks we're wrong for each other. She'll be relieved. My sister. He'd brought other people into this. He'd been laying the ground, rewriting our story to make my heartbreak look inevitable, even reasonable. There were references to conversations with friends, with family. Little jokes about me being too sensitive, too serious, too old in my head. Then, buried in a longer message, I saw the worst of it. He'd told her everything. Details of the hospital visit, the words the doctor used, how I didn't want visitors, how I couldn't go back to work straight away, how I'd had one panic attack in the supermarket when I heard a baby crying and had to leave my trolley in the middle of the aisle. Things I hadn't told anyone else, things I was still trying to understand myself. To her, he'd said, she milks it, uses it as an excuse not to live. I can't carry her forever. Milks it. I scrolled further, faster, needing to reach the bottom as if there might be some redeeming line that made it all make sense. Instead I found a photo, not of them together, of me, a picture I vaguely remembered from months ago. I was sitting on our sofa in pajamas, no makeup, eyes obviously swollen from crying. He'd told me he was just checking his emails. He'd taken a picture of me instead. Sent it to her with the caption, "This is my life now. You see why I miss you." The room tilted. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was the realization that while I'd been at my most broken, believing I was safe with the one person who'd promised to protect me, he'd been documenting it, sharing it, turning my pain into ammunition to win someone else back. I stared at my own face on that tiny screen, unguarded and raw, and felt something inside me go very, very quiet. I didn't wake him. I stood in the doorway and watched him sleep, his mouth slightly open, the TV light flickering across his face. The same face I'd kissed 1,000 times. The same hand, resting on his chest, that had stroked my back in hospital. I stared and waited to feel rage, the kind that makes you throw things, shake someone awake, scream until the neighbors hear. It didn't come. 9F2. B. What I felt was distance, like he was already gone and I was looking at a stranger who happened to be lying on my sofa. I put his phone back exactly where it had been, screen down on the cushion. I turned off the TV, folded the blanket over him like I always did, and walked to the bathroom. I shut the door, sat on the edge of the bath, and let one quiet sob escape before I clamped my hand over my mouth. If I confronted him like this, he'd win. Not in any big, obvious way, but he'd get what he already told her. A crying, hysterical woman he could point to and say, "See, this is what I've been dealing with." I could almost hear him. "She went through my phone. She's paranoid. She's not herself." I saw the path laid out. I shout, he denies, he twists, he cries, he plays the victim. I end up apologizing for looking at his messages while he forgives me and keeps doing exactly what he's been doing. No. I washed my face, stared at myself in the mirror. My eyes looked older than I remembered. Tired, yes, but something else too. A kind of hard, clean line had appeared behind them. I didn't recognize that woman, but I trusted her more than I trusted the version of me who'd believe that trust alone could keep a person faithful. The next morning, I made tea like normal. Toast. Asked about his day. He yawned, scrolled his phone, gave me the half answers he'd been giving for months. "Busy week coming," he said. "Might have to stay late a few nights." I watched his face while he said it. The tiny pause before busy. The way he didn't quite meet my eyes. "Okay," I said. Just that. No challenge, no sarcasm. He looked up for a second, searching my expression, then looked away. Whatever he was checking for, he didn't find it. I had never realized before how much he relied on my reactions to know where he stood. At work, I didn't tell anyone. I answered emails, chased invoices, reminded people about deadlines, ordinary things. In between tasks, I logged into our online banking, downloaded statements, forwarded them to my personal email. I transferred half of what was left in our savings into an account in my name only. My hands shook as I did it. It felt wrong and necessary at the same time. He'd been sorting the money. I could too. That evening, while he was in the shower, I picked up his phone again, not to torture myself, to document. I took photos of the screen. His messages about me, milking it, the picture of me crying, his line about leaving a better woman. Every screenshot went straight to my cloud, then to a USB stick I bought at lunch. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with them yet. I just knew that if this turned into a story later, I wanted the truth in my hands, not just my memory. The first person I told was my sister. I picked her because she loved him too, because if she believed me, I knew I wasn't losing my mind. We sat in her kitchen on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of gray, slow day we usually spent talking about nothing. I told her almost everything, carefully, without raising my voice. She didn't interrupt much. When I finally slid my phone across the table with a few screenshots, she read them, then closed her eyes for a long moment. She said softly. "What are you going to do?" The easy answer was, leave. The dramatic one was, destroy him. Both felt too simple. Leaving would keep me safe, but it wouldn't touch what he'd done with my story, my grief, my money. Destroying him would mean becoming the version of me he'd already described to other people, vindictive, unstable, cruel. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I'm not going to shout. I'm not going to give him a scene he can use against me." She nodded. "You don't have to decide today." That night, lying in bed beside him, I listened to his breathing and thought about what I wanted. Not just what would hurt him, what would be fair, what would let me live with myself afterwards. I thought about messaging her, sending her the full, unedited picture of who he was, telling her, "If I'm a graveyard, then you should know he helped bury me." But then I pictured two women trading pain over a man who'd already taken too much. That didn't feel like justice. That felt like playing his game. What I kept coming back to was this. He had been telling a story about me that wasn't true, to her, to his friends, to our families. A version of me that justified his choices and made my suffering small. My revenge, if I had one, would be to put the real story where his lies had been. Calmly, precisely, without extra poison. Truth, not drama. So I made a quiet list. First, protect myself financially. No more blind trust. I called the bank on my lunch break, had them remove his access to my personal accounts, asked about my rights regarding the mortgage. The woman on the phone was matter of fact, not sympathetic, which helped. It made everything feel like admin, not catastrophe. Second, talk to someone who understood the law. I booked an appointment with a solicitor. I brought the screenshots, the statements. She didn't flinch. She told me my options in simple terms. What a separation would look like, what I was entitled to, what evidence mattered and what didn't. I left with a folder of notes and a sharper sense of the ground beneath my feet. Third, decide who needed to know. Not everyone, not the whole world. Just the people whose opinions he leaned on, the ones he'd already quietly primed against me. His sister, 2 close friends, maybe if it came to it, his parents. I didn't want to humiliate him. I wanted to remove the protection that came from his carefully edited version of events. The plan that eventually formed in my head wasn't dramatic. There would be no big public showdown, no shouted confession at a party. Just a series of conversations, face to face, where I would say, "This is what has been happening. These are his words, not mine. I'm leaving because of them." The last piece was the hardest, when to tell him I knew. Every night for a while, I tested different versions in my head, confronting him over dinner, leaving a note and disappearing, waiting until he said something cruel again and dropping the truth like a stone into the silence. In the end, what I settled on wasn't a speech. It was a moment. I would wait until he offered me his story of us again, the one where he was trapped and I was unreasonable. I would let him say it out loud, then I would show him that I'd seen the other story all along. Until then, I stayed quiet. I watched. I collected small proofs. Times he said he was at work and his location on a shared app betrayed him. Receipts I found in his pockets. Little lies that, on their own, meant nothing, but together painted a pattern I could no longer unsee. He thought my silence meant I didn't notice. He had no idea it meant I was finally, carefully, choosing what to do with the truth. The first person I went to was his sister. We met in a small cafe near her flat. No drama, just 2 women with coffees between them. I told her I needed to talk about something important and that I wasn't asking her to take sides, only to listen. I laid out the facts like I was reading from a report. The messages, the timing, the money quietly moved. I didn't embellish. I didn't call him names. When I finished, I slid a thin envelope across the table, printed screenshots, bank statements with the dates highlighted. She read in silence. Her face went pale at the line about the better woman. She paused at the photo of me crying on the sofa. "He sent her this?" she asked, voice low. "Yes." She closed the envelope carefully, like it might break. "He told me you were not coping, that you were pushing him away, that he didn't know how much longer he could handle it." I nodded. I figured he would. Something shifted in her eyes. Not just anger at him, a quiet recalculation. The story he'd been building about me fell apart in front of us, piece by piece, under the weight of his own words. "I'm leaving," I said. "I've seen a solicitor. I'll be all right. I just didn't want you to hear some watered-down version where I'm crazy or overreacting and not know the rest." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You don't sound crazy," she said. "You sound very, very tired." After that, it became a pattern. One conversation at a time. His oldest friend met me in a quiet pub midweek. We sat in a corner. I told him simply, "He's been having an emotional and physical affair. He's been taking money from our savings. I have proof. I'm ending it." I showed him one page, just one. The message about leaving a better woman, the complaint about living in a graveyard, the line about sorting the money before leaving. He stared at it for a long time. "He said you were distant," his friend murmured. "Said he was trying, and you wouldn't meet him halfway." "I was grieving," I said. "And so was he, supposedly. This is how he chose to grieve." I wasn't asking for sympathy. I just wanted the record corrected in the minds that mattered to him. His friend folded the paper and handed it back. I don't know what to say, he admitted, but I can't unsee this. That's enough, I said. By the time I finally spoke to my husband, the scaffolding of his version of events was already weakened. The people he trusted as mirrors had seen another reflection. I waited until everything practical was in place, until I had my own account secure, legal advice in writing, a small rental lined up if I needed to move quickly. Then, one evening after dinner, I asked if we could sit at the table for a minute. He looked wary, but he sat. I've spoken to a solicitor, I said. My voice surprised me. It sounded like I was discussing office policy. I'm ending the marriage. He blinked. What? Where is this coming from? Is this about you being upset again? It's coming from your messages, I said quietly. The ones to her, and from the money you've been moving. I know about both. I placed a folder on the table and opened it halfway. His words, his transfers, dates, times, amounts. I didn't push it towards him. I just left it there, between us. Color drained from his face as he skimmed the first page. I watched the exact moment the lies he'd rehearsed collided with the evidence in front of him. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. It's not what it looks like, he started. It looks like exactly what it is, I replied, still calm. You told her you left a better woman for me. You told her I was a graveyard. You took our savings to fund weekends away. You turned my grief into a story about your suffering. Those are your words, not mine. He flicked through the pages faster, panicked now. You shouldn't have gone through my phone. You know that's wrong. You're making this bigger than it is. It was just talking. I was confused. I'm not here to argue about degrees of betrayal, I said. I'm not shouting. I'm not throwing anything. I've put everything in that folder and given it to a solicitor. This, I tapped the papers lightly, is what I'm basing my decision on. For a moment, there was silence. Just the sound of pages shifting. What are you going to tell people? He asked eventually, eyes sharp. The truth, I said. What I've just told you, and I've already started. So when you go to them with a different version, just know they've seen this. The next days, I watched the consequences unfold without lifting a finger. He called his sister. I heard the clipped tone in his voice behind the closed door, the way it grew strained, then flat. When he came out, he wouldn't meet my eyes. Later, I saw his phone light up with messages from his friend, long ones he didn't open in front of me. He didn't rage, he sulked. He moved through the house like a guest and started sleeping on the sofa without me asking. The confidence he'd had, the easy assumption that people would side with him, seemed to leak away as conversations with others failed to give him what he wanted. I didn't follow up. I didn't demand updates. I went to work, cooked simple meals, sorted my paperwork, and answered only when spoken to. The facts were already out there, balanced in other people's hands. He had built his comfort on a story where I was unstable and he was trapped. My revenge, in the end, was simple. I took that story away and left him alone with the truth he'd written himself. The divorce didn't happen overnight. It moved the way legal things always do. Forms, appointments, signatures. Ordinary, boring steps for something that was quietly ending the life I'd built. At the first joint meeting with the solicitor, he tried on a new expression, wounded reasonableness. He spoke about mistakes and confusion and bad timing. He said he hadn't meant to hurt me, that we were both struggling, that maybe we could pause everything and try counseling first. The solicitor listened, then slid the folder of evidence between us again. Your client, she said evenly, has already made her position very clear. The messages, the financial movements, and the timelines speak for themselves. He went quiet. I watched his shoulders tense as he realized there was no performance that could undo words he'd written in his own hand. No way to spin better woman and sorting the money into something noble. We went through the assets, the house, the savings that were left, my pension, his. The money he'd taken didn't vanish into a shrug. It appeared in calculations, in percentages, in phrases like taken into account and compensated for. His affair weekends had a number beside them now, a financial weight that settled on his side of the ledger. He signed the paperwork with a tight jaw. I signed with hands that shook only a little. His reputation didn't explode, it eroded. His sister stopped making excuses for him. She told him, gently but firmly, that she'd seen the screenshots, that she'd been there when I could barely get out of bed, and he'd been working late. When he complained about me, she no longer nodded along. She changed the subject. He noticed. His closest friend didn't cut him off, but there was distance, fewer invitations, no automatic agreement when he hinted that I'd overreacted. A quiet, uncomfortable neutrality that used to be easy loyalty. The story he'd prepared, that he'd tried everything, that I'd been impossible, that he'd just slipped, never quite landed. Too many people had already seen the original script. The only person who didn't know yet was her. I hadn't planned to involve her. I thought my revenge began and ended with my own life, my own circle. But one evening, a few weeks before the decree came through, I got an email from an address I recognized from his screenshots. She was polite, careful. She said she'd heard we were separating, that he'd told her we'd been done for ages, that I'd found innocent messages and blown them out of proportion. She said she didn't want drama, just to understand whether she was the reason my marriage had ended. I stared at the screen for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it, let her find out who he was in her own time. Another part remembered the hospital room, the sofa, the photo he'd sent of me crying, the way he'd described both of us to each other to get what he wanted. He had stolen my story. I wasn't going to help him rewrite hers. I replied with one line and one attachment. This is what was happening while I was married to him. These are his words. Do whatever you think is right. I attached the same folder I'd shown the solicitor. No commentary. No highlighted insults. Just the facts. She didn't write back. She didn't have to. I knew she'd read it when I heard him slam a door a few days later, harder than he'd slammed anything since this began. I stayed in my room, listening to muffled fragments through walls and phone calls, his voice low and desperate, then raised, then silent. After that, her name stopped lighting up his screen. By the time the divorce was final, his future looked very different to the one he'd described in those messages. There was no place together near her work. No escape into the arms of the better woman who understood him. Just a rented room in a shared house, a reduced circle of allies, and a story about me that no longer held up under even basic scrutiny. I moved into a small flat with thin walls and too much light. It wasn't much, but it was mine. My name on the lease. My furniture, mismatched but chosen. My savings, smaller now, but safe. For a long time, I expected to feel triumphant. I thought revenge would taste like victory. It didn't. It tasted like quiet. Like waking up alone and not having to wonder who my husband was texting, like looking at my own reflection and knowing I hadn't screamed, hadn't lied, hadn't become the monster he needed me to be. He'd called our home a graveyard, said I was death to his happiness. In the end, I left him there, alone with the ghosts of his own words, while I walked out into a life that, for the first time in a long time, belonged only to me. My silence had never been weakness. It was the one thing he couldn't twist. The space where his own truth finally turned against him.